Can a YouTube video be #1 on Netflix? In 2018, the streaming wars were ramping up, and YouTube decided they wanted skin in the game. Enter YouTube Red, YouTube's version of Hulu, Netflix, or Disney Plus, with a catalog of original scripted content.
Today, YouTube Red no longer exists, and every show that they made was canceled. But Netflix reached down and chose one show to survive, and that show was Cobra Kai.
But would a YouTube show work on real TV? Well, Netflix took a gamble on Cobra Kai, and it became the #1 streaming show, with season 5 outpacing The House of the Dragon, The Rings of Power, and She-Hulk. And there's a reason for this. It's storytelling and editing.
It was never written that way, it was never shot that way, but I constructed it to make you feel like it was conceived that way.
Zach Arnold has edited the most iconic episodes of Cobra Kai and became its lead editor in season 5, mostly due to his storytelling philosophies.
We manipulate the way that people think and the way that people feel.
We sat down with Zach and explored the language of editing on Netflix.
I'm just not a good editor, I'm not good at this. It's like, no, you just don't speak the language yet.
And if traditional editors care about Netflix's algorithm.
We do not, and I'm very glad that we don't.
I want to just jump straight into it. You being a lead editor for Cobra Kai, a phenomenal TV show that I think for me is exciting because it was originally a YouTube premium show, a YouTube original show, transitioned onto Netflix, and then for you to then identifying that show, falling in love with that show, and then went, okay, I have to be on this show. Tell us about how you got the job with Cobra Kai.
The cool thing about my story with Cobra Kai, and there's a lot of interesting points of it, but I never intended to be here talking about Cobra Kai season 5, one of Netflix's top shows on the planet. When I originally discovered Cobra Kai, like you said, in the world of YouTube, first season had just come out. And because the algorithm reads our minds, I was watching something else on YouTube, and boom, there in the sidebar was the trailer for it. My first reaction was, wait, what? How dare they? Who is remaking The Karate Kid? How dare they destroy my childhood? Because for me, The Karate Kid was my Star Wars. Like, this is the film of all the films growing up that really defined who I am, my experience as a child, becoming an adult. Martial arts is a huge part of my life. Maybe not so much anymore today. The mindsets are, the actual practice of it, I did for years and years and years because of The Karate Kid. So I saw the trailer and I said, I'm going to hate watch this. I'm just going to hate watch this because this is going to be the worst thing ever. And I watched the trailer and I'm thinking, okay, that wasn't the worst thing ever. I think, you know what? I'm going to hate watch the pilot because I'm sure the show sucks. So I did the same thing that everybody else did when it came out. I watched the first episode and then I cleared my calendar and I watched the next 9 episodes and watched the whole 10 episodes in one block. And as soon as I was done with that, I said, I'm cutting this show. There's never been a show that makes more sense for both my sensibilities as an editor, my style, my experience, but just the stories that I want to tell and be a part of. But at the time, nobody knew what it was, and it was just this little tiny YouTube show. So I started asking around. I'm like, is this even like a union thing? Like, do they have budgets? Like, are they paying people? Because it was YouTube. Like, there was nothing like that on YouTube. So I started to ask around and I found a couple of people that I knew that I had worked with in the past that worked on it. And they're like, yeah, Sony produces it. It's like a legit TV show. So through my various networking strategies, I was able to get myself in the room with the 3 showrunners when they weren't even interviewing editors at the time, and essentially got the job in the room. And I've been working on it ever since and have seen the evolution from tiny little no-name YouTube show to us literally not having a home between seasons 2 and 3 that most people don't know about. Then Netflix picks it up. We wait years for season 3 and 4 to even come out. And now here we are 5 years later. So I never saw any of this coming.
So you had your own love, like your love for The Karate Kid and I think your love for the shows and that being a massive inspiration. And so this literally felt like a calling. It's like, this is for me having a love letter to my childhood that I can then express in today's cinema.
Yeah, very much so. It was just one of those moments where I saw it and I'm like, oh, now I realize why I've been doing this for 30 years. This is where I am meant to be. It very much all came together. But again, it wasn't a matter of, ooh, this is such a hugely popular show and it's #1 on Netflix. I have to be a part of it. Like, at the time, my agent was like, you want us to set up an interview for what? It's a YouTube show? And they were offering me stuff for HBO and bigger networks and premium cable channels. I'm like, this is what I want to work on. They're like, okay, we'll set it up if that's what you want. And, you know, obviously they're not too upset about it 5 years later.
What intrigues me is those networking strategies that you talk about. And I think I would love to know, like, what did you do to get in the room and why did that show particularly speak to you?
I really understood their show very, very well. And I believed in my heart of hearts that not only did they have a great show, I believed that I could actually make it better. And that could come off as very arrogant, but I was coming off with confidence, saying, you guys have created something amazing, but there are still areas of improvement. And I want to bring my level of expertise and I want to help you improve the show. So I found I think there were one or two people just in the random credits. I'm like, oh, I worked with that person once for 5 weeks, 3 years ago. And what I wanted to do, and this is a core foundation of my networking building relationship strategy, it can't be about you, it has to be about them. You have to provide value to them first. So I blocked out an entire week of my calendar that was a very busy week. And I rewatched the entire first season twice. And I wrote an extensive article, not that it was a review saying, oh, Cobra Kai is awesome, everybody needs to watch it. And remember, this was like 2 weeks after it came out and nobody knew what it was. It was instead breaking down the deeper themes of why Cobra Kai is not a good show, but it's an important show, especially for people that see themselves as an underdog or find that they're being pushed around or they're being bullied. Here are the lessons that come from the show and why it's an important show. I sent that link to the one person that I worked with several years ago for 4 weeks saying, you guys created something awesome. I am so excited that I found this. I wanted you to see this article that I wrote about it. And this person responded back saying it was a really great experience. Glad that you liked it. By the way, they might be looking for editors for season 2. Interested? And of course, I believe at that time I either blacked out or was jumping up and down. I honestly don't even remember the reaction, but it was just one of those moments of like, this is the opportunity that I've been waiting for years and years and years. So before just going into the interview, thinking to myself, I'm going to show them how good I am, right? That's usually the mentality in the interview, is that this is my story. I'm the hero of my story, and I want you to help me achieve my dreams. That's not the position. They are the hero of their story, and you are the guide that's going to help them achieve their visions and their dreams. So what I did is I researched the 3 showrunners extensively, watched all of their previous movies, scratching my head watching Hot Tub Time Machine, thinking, these are the guys that made Cobra Kai, but at the same time, really crawling into their heads to understand why they do what they do. I watched several podcast interviews with them, and they said something that really stood out. They said, well, growing up, the Karate Kid was kind of our Star Wars. Whoa, okay, now I see that there's a really deep emotional connection they have to it. It wasn't just we have an opportunity to financially capitalize off of yet another 80s reboot. They really believed in it, and I knew that I believed in it. So knowing all of that, I walked into the interview starting with why. I started with, I am here today talking to you because I saw your show and it resonated because the Karate Kid is my Star Wars. And from there, just talked about all the things in the show that really resonated with me. And then I made the interview all about them and their challenges. What are some of the challenges you had season 1 in post-production with editing, or things that worked out really well, things that didn't work out so well? And with all of the gaps or the holes they had season 1, I came to them with solutions.
Wow.
So in the interview, again, it wasn't, I'm awesome, you need to pay attention to me and hire me. It's, I understand your challenges and I believe I'm the solution. The other amazing thing about this that just told me this was meant to be, I show up for my interview, I meet with them in the room, and then at the end of the interview, they're like, hey, do you want to go meet Ralph? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, excuse me, Ralph? They're like, yeah, Ralph Macchio is visiting. Do you want to meet Ralph before you leave the interview? I'm like, okay. So I'm there in my interview for the Karate Kid, meeting the Karate Kid. And that was the moment I'm like, how is this not meant to be? So I went into the writer's room, met Ralph Macchio, and then, got the job, and the rest is history.
That's like people who love Star Wars meeting Mark Hamill.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's love for the show. There's love for who you are as growing up with that film, having the opportunity to put into it. How do you think that passion translated in your editing?
Well, I think that the first thing that's so vitally important for a show like Cobra Kai, and the reason why it's successful, and I've read countless interviews and I've watched countless interviews with the showrunners, everybody asks the same question. Why is it with all the 80s reboots, or just reboots in general, that don't work, why is yours successful? And there's 2 reasons. There's a formula that's very, very clear for most of the reboots that work and most that don't. For Cobra Kai, it's a very clear formula. Number 1, you have to respect the original material. But number 2, you have to bring something new to the original material. If it was just a remake in TV form, it would not have lasted long. Or if they'd said, screw the original, that's old and outdated, we're gonna show all the things about it that could have been better and we're gonna make it our own version, wouldn't have worked. but there's a tremendous amount of respect for the old version. But then they said, let's totally reinvent it at the same time. So what I think really comes through in the show itself, and we've been told this multiple times, is you can tell the people that make Cobra Kai love the Karate Kid, because it's not just you cut to a flashback for informational purposes. It really causes you to feel certain things. It really creates these moments. And some of those moments are in the writing. Most of the moments that you see are created in editorial. So an example would be off the top of my head in the season 5 finale, the big fight between Silver and Daniel, where he's basically using like the 3 rules of Quicksilver. That happened in the edit suite. That didn't even exist. That was just a fight where they shot the fight on set and I cut the fight together and I'm like, something's missing. Like we have been building towards this for over 3 decades and 2 entire seasons. And it's a good fight, but it's just a fight. There needs to be a deeper level of emotional resonance. So I called the guys. I'm like, I've got a crazy idea. And the first thing they're like, we don't give a shit. Do whatever. We trust you. Right. But I'm like, just hear me out. Like, I know this is a really, really big scene, but it's missing something. They're like, yeah, it's kind of rushed and blah, blah, blah. Like they say that about every scene and every day. Like, oh, we wish we had more time and more money. Everybody's got the same problem. Right. So here's what I think. I think we build the entire fight sequence about the 3 rules of Quicksilver, because coincidentally, the 3 moves that he does to knock Silver down are in order the 3 moves of Quicksilver. It was never written that way. It was never shot that way, but I constructed it to make you feel like it was conceived that way. That would not come from somebody that just walked in, got the dailies, and had to construct a scene. That came from my deep internal knowledge of the entire series and watching that scene. And in my head, hearing Silver's rules, I'm like, I keep seeing this thing. I need to externalize it and make it reality. So that would not happen if I were not completely and totally obsessed with the Karate Kid when I was a child.
That's what passion is. That's what the soul is. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think that show does work. It clearly does go with that 80s style. That has a little bit of this, that cheese towards it. But then the way that you are presenting the story and the way that you're respecting and loving the story gives it a gorgeous amount of charm. Was that been your favorite action scene you've edited?
It actually isn't. My favorite action scene, and we'll get into this later, but in some ways, all scenes are action scenes.
Yeah.
Which sounds odd, but you can have 2 people sitting on each end of a table, and in its own way, dramatically, it's an action scene. But as far as action, my favorite scene is also probably one of the most challenging experiences I've ever been through in my life, which was the season 4 finale, the All Valley tournament between Sam and Tori. That was a monster of a sequence to put together.
What were the challenges behind it?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? The first challenge was that, I don't remember the exact page count, but I think just for this one scene, it was 9 pages.
Wow.
And when you're writing a fight scene that's 9 pages, you don't write every single little beat. So you can imagine that of those 9 pages, it extends outwards. And for anybody that is watching that's more into YouTube or TikTok or whatnot that hasn't worked with scripted material, there are things called camera setups. So right now we have 3 cameras on us, right? We have a master camera, we have an A camera, we have a B camera, right? So that's 3 different setups. So if you're going to write down your coverage, you have scene 1, scene 1A, scene 1B, correct? Mm-hmm. So this one is scene 16. That's not giving any massive spoilers. So it's scene 16, and the final letter of the coverage of that scene was BD. And you're thinking, that doesn't even make sense. What does that mean? That means they went through the entire alphabet twice and around a 3rd time. So you get to 16Z, then it's 16AA, 16AB, AC. They got to BD with 3 cameras running on every setup. So I got this footage for one fight sequence, and I immediately sent a message to the producer that's in charge of managing all the deliverables and the calendars, and I said, I'm going to need like 3 extra weeks to deliver my editor's cut. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, the amount of footage that I have is almost insurmountable for this one sequence. So I told her the amount of footage and the hours that they were running and the amount of setups. She's like, okay, just let me know when it's done. And then I just disappeared into the ether for like 3 weeks to cut this sequence.
That one sequence.
So just that alone made it incredibly challenging. The next major challenge for the fight sequence is that obviously there is a ton of choreography. It's basically like its own episode in a way, where each of these points has its own story, which is another key point to anytime you're cutting anything, whether it's action, dialogue, whatever. You have to be able to break down a scene into individual sections and moments, because they all have their little mini scenes.
What's going to change that?
Right,
yeah.
exactly. So this was huge, but and this is a little bit of a spoiler, I might even get in trouble for sharing this, but the final sequence of points where Tori finally beat Sam didn't work.
Okay.
So the final sequence where we're building up to the final point, completely and totally constructed in editing. Because what they worked and choreographed and shot did not work. So I had to pull from other pieces of the fight and resequence the entire fight. So you think this is chronologically the way that it was shot and the way that it was written? Nope. I had to reorder the whole fight to steal pieces so that, number one, the continuity made sense, but I could emotionally build to the final moment where Tori beat Sam. And if you saw like just the master shot of the entire scene, of which there isn't one because it's all done in tiny little pieces, but let's presume that they shot the whole scene in a master scene, you'd watch it and you'd be like, this isn't even remotely the final version because it's all out of sequence based on building the drama to that final point, which is not the way it was shot.
It could be quite easy to prioritize the action as that's what you cut to. I think it looks like you prioritize the story.
Yeah. Oh, always. I mean, there is no world in where you're not going to prioritize story. And that's not just for dramatic television. If you're doing a music video, if you're doing a YouTube video, if you're doing a TikTok video, everything is about story, right? So if we're going to get a little bit bigger and existential, whenever somebody asks me what I do for a living, the simple answer is, I'm an editor or I'm a storyteller, right? That's not what I do for a living. What I do for a living is I create moments.
Wow.
It's that simple. I create moments. And I can construct a scene and I can assemble all the dailies in the order that it goes. And I can have continuity and make sure when they pass the glass across the table, the continuity matches. But that's not emotionally compelling. So my job is not to assemble dailies or cut scenes. My job is to create moments. And creating moments requires making subjective choices about who does the scene belong to. Wow. What coverage do I need to be on at a certain moment? Even if somebody's saying the words, if that's not their scene, I want to be in the person's reaction with those words. So again, it doesn't matter if you have characters that are fighting it out on the tournament floor. You've got two characters that are sitting on a boat in the middle of nowhere, right? You have to figure out whose scene is it, who does the action belong to, and whose story are you telling so you can create the right moments. So it's not just I've assembled a scene, it's I've assembled a collection of important moments, and those moments are what compel you to watch something and continue watching over and over and over.
That's what's interesting. I mean, you mentioned the boat scene as well, which I think was in season 3, episode 7. It was a refusal of the call, trying to get Sam character ready to get back into the fight, and then also help the relationship with the father. I would say there's small beats, there's small moments where you are trying to explore the dynamic between those two. Are you even making sure that even just like that microsecond, does that mean something between those two characters?
Yes. So essentially as an editor, and it's going to depend on your platform, tool of choice, and where you are in the world, but at least for me, I'm editing life at 24 frames a second. I have to account for every single of those 24 frames. So my job is, number one, to make sure that the audience's attention is where it needs to be for every 24th of a second. And number two, I need to know what they're feeling at that time. So this is a very controversial statement that has been debated ad nauseum for decades in the world of editorial. We manipulate people's emotions. Any editor that says we don't manipulate is full of it, and they're kidding themselves. We manipulate the way that people think and the way that people feel. As long as we're doing it for the right intentions and we want somebody to feel happy or sad or help them feel cathartic about a loss or grief, whatever it is, I have no problem with being a manipulator. But make no mistake, I manipulate this experience so people can experience the way that I want them to. So again, if it's just a matter of you've got two people sitting in a boat and I make sure that the audience sees their faces while they're saying the words in the right order, well, yeah, the information gets there, but you feel nothing. Right? So the basic level that a lot of editors feel is just proficiency. Well, I'm going to make sure that I can cut all the coverage, all the continuity works, and I can see everybody saying all the words. You're going to bore the hell out of people doing that, right? It's all about subjectively telling them, I want you to feel something at this moment. And when somebody watches that scene, I can tell them, I bet you're feeling this now. I am. I bet you just felt this. I did. How did you do that? Well, you break down the timeline. I'll show you exactly why.
Well, should we break it down?
Let's break it down. Let's break it down. I love that idea.
This isn't so bad, is it?
Guess it beats going to school.
Something about the quiet, sound of the water. It always seems to just help.
For the most part, this scene has fairly standard coverage.
I thought you and I could both use a little bit of that today.
Is that why we're out here?
I also thought we could catch some dinner for tonight.
wide master shot. This is kind of the closer, two shots. And you've got the other coverage that's looser and that's tighter. So for anybody that doesn't spend a whole lot of time working with scripted dailies and material, it's not just about we have the different angles and I'm just going to choose whatever works. You always have to ask yourself, how does the framing and how does the lens and the size create a very specific emotion? Yeah. And some of it's obvious. Like, for example, looking at this 2-shot right now, this isn't anybody's scene. Right? This is just a 2-shot. We see both of their action and it's emotionally balanced. So I'm never just thinking about when do I want to cut to this based on what looks good or I need to fix the continuity. And by the way, the other thing about this scene, the continuity was awful.
Oh, wow.
Fishing lines in this direction, and they did the lure. Like, this is one of those where you watch the scene, you're like, oh, this must have been really simple to cut. This scene was so hard to cut. Almost as bad as a dinner table scene. Those are the hardest things on the planet. You think cutting a tournament scene is hard? Put 6 people eating at a dinner table.
Oh, that would be
impossible. Yeah. But this was very similar as far as continuity challenges.
Are you following the philosophy of like who's in charge here?
Yes. So one thing that you always need to be able to answer with any scene is whose scene is it? So whenever I analyze it on paper first, I think to myself, who does this scene belong to? Because I need to make choices subjectively based on, should it be close-up? Should it be wide shots? Do I hang more on this person? And then the other thing is, where does the scene turn? What are the moments, right? So I had to think to myself, what is the moment or the important moments? So as we start to go through this, I can show you where a couple of those are and how I was able to make that obvious to the audience without them knowing they were being manipulated.
Do you remember the last time we were out here together?
It was with Mr. Miyagi. Caught that fish that was so big, Mom was afraid to cook it for dinner.
Pretty sure we ended up ordering in a pizza. That was the day we taught you how to balance on the bow of the boat.
If you were to just go into this scene and you were to make sure that everybody says the words and you see them saying the words, you would think to yourself, especially as somebody that lives in the YouTube, TikTok era, my God, that moment was slow, right? Yeah. Why are there pauses? Dear Lord, it must move faster. My brain can't handle the pauses. This is the first moment where the scene turns. You can already see that Daniel is calculating in his head, how do I start this conversation? So rather than it just being this balance, like back and forth, like, oh, we're fishing out here, we're on the water, you can see this is where the scene changes and goes in a different direction. So essentially, the reason that I created that moment was to have that pause. That was a very deliberate choice. So watch it again. Feel that?
Yeah.
You can feel the wheels turning in his head.
He's literally deciding,
yeah,
should I say this? Or like, is this a good idea to take this step?
And for me, I'm begging for like that silence to be filled with something in terms of like, where's the story going to go? That silence says so much more than the actual dialogue.
Exactly. And that's one of the things you have to realize, especially in today's day and age of YouTube and TikTok and Instagram Reels, where you see these little portions of people talking. They literally take out every frame of space and silence, which by the way, is an old fart like me, drives me insane. Like, just let me feel the silences. But just getting deeper into human psychology, it terrifies us when there's silence.
Yeah.
It's really awkward, and you almost tried to fill the silence and you didn't realize.
I was like, he's doing a silence. Oh, he almost got me there.
But your instinct was, I need to fill the silence because it's awkward, right? So when people think to themselves, how do I create a moment? Well, I need a big music cue, or I need a sound effect, or whatever. Silence can be equally or even more effective at creating a moment. And when we talk about working at 24 frames a second, and I have to be in charge of all 24 frames of those seconds, you'll notice, watch Daniel's eyes at the very beginning of where I chose to begin this shot.
That was the day we taught you how to balance on the bow of the boat.
You know the wheels are turning because he's doing this, right? That's not just us hanging before he says the words. That's us telling the story. He's thinking about what he wants to say because we feel the conversation turning. So that's a moment created with absolutely nothing except silence.
Brilliant. One thing that's interesting, I have a question. We're on this like wider 2-shot, and you probably had his close-up, and you chose to not cut to his close-up in this moment. Why is that?
Very deliberately, because I want to see that she's totally disconnected from him. She's staring off into space. He's just kind of in this serene place. Because ultimately, this isn't Daniel's scene. This is her scene. So I need to know, where is she while he's calculating and the wheels are turning? I don't want it to be his scene. If this were his scene and it were about him, I would have used his close-up. But that's where it's so important to know who is the scene about and who owns that scene. This is hers, not his. So I want to know where she is cognitively and emotionally while he is having the wheels turn. So you know that while he's thinking about what he's going to say, she has no idea what's coming, which then factors later into the scene when she's like, whoa, hold on a second. You're just trying to get me to do this thing, right? She's caught off guard because you can see that she's just in the moment. So the very deliberate choice to not use the close-up there.
That was the day we taught you how to balance on the bow of the boat. Not that we needed to teach you. We couldn't knock you off to save our lives. Want to give it another shot for old time's sake? What do you say?
I knew it.
Boom. Now her close-up, you see on her face, how dare you, right? I can't believe this is why you're bringing this up.
I knew it.
You knew what?
Is that why you brought me here? To trick me into doing karate?
Oh, what? No, not at all.
So now it's more confrontation, all close-ups. We want to really bring them close to each other to enhance that
The
conflict.
cuts are getting faster between them as
Yep.
well.
The speed is happening faster. They're talking on top of each other, which you feel because they weren't talking on top of each other. It's that contrast.
Be honest with me, Sam.
I froze, okay?
See what just happened there?
Yep.
What did I use to create that moment?
Silence.
Silence, but then what's the second element that I used to tell you the scene is turning somewhere else?
There was a music cue in there
There's
as
a
well.
music cue that started to come in. So as I'm cutting a scene, in my head, I hear where the music is going to come in. So the first pass of a scene, and this is a rookie mistake that everybody makes, is they put the music in right when they're cutting the scene. That's a crutch because they don't know how the scene is supposed to feel. So I cut an entire episode with zero music unless there's like a big featured montage. It's pretty hard to cut like a training montage that's to AC/DC, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, doing it in your head. So then I'll use the music.
Yeah.
But in general, I'll cut an entire episode completely dry. I'll put the whole episode together and I'll watch it. And it's not that I'm trying to figure out where I'm putting the music or the score. It's where am I feeling the absence of something? And that was a moment when I cut the scene together. I wanted, like, the reason it goes to that wide shot is they're just sitting there in the silence and you're not sure who's the scene going to go to next. It's like a ping pong match. Yeah. But I just started to feel we want to lean into this emotional moment. So the music, oh so subtly, again, manipulates us.
I froze, okay?
Into feeling like we want to lean into the scene emotionally, then we come back into the close-ups. So again, it's not just make sure that I see everybody talking and I use all the coverage because that's what the director shot. It's what scenes, what visuals, and what sounds create the emotional moments that I want to be able to share in a scene.
I watched my friends get hurt. I watched Dimitri get his arm broken, and I couldn't do anything.
So she's in
Now I'm having
close
all these panic
and he's
attacks,
distant.
and I
That's
don't know
also
if I'm
a
gonna be able to
distinctive
defend
choice,
myself
right?
again.
And then on that hard line, I'm so sorry. That's when he apologized, cuts to close.
Just take me home.
And then I can choose to end the scene anywhere that I want, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm the editor. I have full and total control. I could have ended in a wide shot. I could have ended on a shot of Daniel upset. But whose scene is it? That was Sam's scene. So the feeling that I want walking away from it is that she is upset. Not that Daniel feels bad. Not that we're enjoying this day fishing. I need to end on her face that tells me I am leaving Sam in this emotional state so that when I come back to Sam, that was the last thing I remember about her emotional state. So it's not just what's the story, it's tracing the emotional states of the characters to maintain continuity.
So even just the outshot is as important.
There are no unimportant shots. Every single shot, every single moment, like I said, my job as an editor is I need to account for and I need to be able to defend 24 frames per second of all of my choices. So if somebody were to say to me, well, why did you choose to end here instead of the frame after? I need to have a reason. It can't just be, well, because that's what matched when they were handing the glasses to each other. Nope, there has to be a better reason than that. Sometimes it comes down to because it would totally distract somebody if it didn't match, but continuity is by far not the top thing on the list. I mean, you've got the book over there. That's literally the book on this in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't make any of this stuff up. I didn't come up with it myself, but you just start to internalize these rules and you realize that creating these moments and feeling the characters and their journey is far more important than making sure you use all the coverage or all the continuity matches.
You're not trying to put yourself as the editor in front of it. It's like, who's the character? What's the emotion? What's the story? And that is a priority. It's not maintaining continuity. It's not showing this big wide shot. Look how beautiful this location was. In this case, since you're cutting from the A and B plots, what's the cliffhanger moment that makes you want to know what happens when we cut back to them? And that close up just tells me this is unresolved. And actually, it's been made worse. And I want to know if this can be fixed or will it get worse?
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to leave every scene resolved, why would you keep watching anything ever?
Yeah.
Right. We watch because things are unresolved and we want to see what happens next. So if I left the scene with them giving each other a hug and saying, oh, this is all great and let's fish for the rest of the day, boring. Yeah. Right. I want to know I'm leaving with the fact that we've ratcheted up the conflict and the drama more. So we continue watching these various plots because with every single scene, we ratchet up the drama and we want to know what happens next. One other thing I want to add that I think is so important, especially for newer editors. It really doesn't matter what medium, but if you're especially going to get into longer form, let's say we had this really wide, beautiful shot, right? Let's say that they had this gorgeous crane shot where it's a oneer that they're going through and doing all these amazing things. It took us 12 hours and $100,000 for the shot. Why didn't you use it in the cut? Because it didn't tell your story. Yeah, but we worked so hard on it. I don't care. That's not my job. My job is to tell the best story possible. And I think a lot of editors, especially younger ones, don't feel that they have the right to say that because they're like, well, they put in all this time and all this money and the director's more important than I am and the producers are more important. So I have to put it in there. So then they do put it in there. And then the director and the producer are like, so this scene isn't working and it's really slow. What's the problem with it? It's like, it's because that thing that you wanted me to put in isn't telling your story and it doesn't feel right. So you really have to have the level of confidence to know that one of the things I think to step back for a second that a lot of editors, especially again, younger ones get stuck with is the idea that I've seen everything and I know better than everybody what works. And this is my vision of the best version of what this thing is. And it's not. Your job is to help somebody else achieve their vision. Your job is to be a shepherd of the story, but sometimes that means protecting directors and producers and writers from themselves because they see a totally different project on set than we see in the edit room.
It's better for you to be in the illusion of film than to know what it actually took to get there.
Yep, exactly. So I'm really a firm believer that the editor has to be the first audience member, and that's the only way to maintain objectivity is to not know what it looks like outside the frame.
You have your own understanding of how to edit the show. And like you have your own philosophies alongside of that. But you're not editing every single episode. And so you would have edit episode 1, but then you won't be back until episode 4 or 5. How does everyone maintain consistency and maintaining the philosophy of the cut of Cobra Kai or TV shows in general?
So TV in general, it can be very challenging because you just can't work on everything. There are shows where there are some editors that have the luxury and the ability to be the only editor. Like a friend of mine, Michelle Tesoro, she cut the Queen's Gambit. She cut every second of it.
Wow.
I don't even know how that's possible logistically, but she cut every second of it. She was the only editor.
One of the best things I've ever seen on Netflix.
I was going to say that would be a dream. It'd also be a nightmare because it means you have to cut everything, right? Yeah. And that's a 10-hour feature film. So that's a lot of work. But in general, that's not the way that it works. You're going to have a 3-editor rotation, a 4-editor rotation. So ultimately, the vision, the creative continuity between all of them has very little to do with the editors and has a lot to do with the people that are running the show that are in charge and their ability to communicate. So if you watch a show where from episode to episode, it's very disjointed and stylistically it's very different and it just doesn't feel right, that's not necessarily on the editors. That's on the showrunners that are unable to communicate what they want from all their episodes. So our showrunners are very good at communicating what they want, almost to a fault. I'm fine saying that publicly because they know that I would agree. They're like me, they're perfectionists. And they will just give note after note after note. We talked about this in the podcast that I did with them, that I've never worked on a TV show with as many notes as they give, but they also know exactly what they want. And they communicate what they want and they don't hold back. And if they're not getting what they want and a cut needs to go out, they call the studio and they say, you're waiting longer for our cut until we get it right. So part of the reason the show is so good, but also so continuously good across all episodes is because of their ability to make it very cohesive and very seamless. Behind the scenes, what's happening between the editors is, especially with a newer show, it's a little bit different when you get into season 4 or 5, 6. You already have a very established formula. You know the music cues, you know how they do transitions, you get the pacing. But in the first couple of seasons of a show, there's a lot of passing back and forth. So I've done a multitude of series in the first season where I was the pilot editor. And then once it's picked up from pilot to series, there's a lot of back and forth where somebody watches the pilot or I watch what they're doing in episode 2 or episode 3. It's like, oh, I never would have thought to do that with a montage or use that kind of music cue. Maybe I'll try that in the pilot that I'm reworking, whatever it is. So there has to be a lot of collaboration, but also on Cobra Kai specifically, and this happens a lot more in TV nowadays because the volume of work is so large, is that you usually have an editor that's either technically, very specifically in a supervising editor position, or unofficially, there's kind of sort of somebody behind the scenes that's that continuity. And just by default, I kind of started to assume that role after a while. So what would happen is that I would be in charge of my rotation, and I was basically in a vacuum, not even knowing what was going on with the other episodes. And then the showrunners would come to me and say, we're just having a really hard time cracking this montage or this sequence. Like, can you take a look at it, give it your thoughts, or maybe you just cut your own version of it. So I started to get my hands on a lot of other things where I don't get any credit on the show or whatever, which is totally fine because I'm just there to again, help them achieve their vision. But a lot of the continuity came from, at least from an editorial perspective, they would come to me and say, how do we make this thing feel more like the show? We can't crack the code.
Wow.
Which kind of leads to the question that I've gotten a lot for season 5. They're like, you're an associate producer now. What does that mean? I'm like, it's a title. Like my day-to-day is exactly the same. I still cut the show. I have my 4 episodes, but I'm more directly involved in just kind of helping to make choices outside those 4 episodes. And that's becoming much more common in TV, where you have kind of a lead voice where they don't cut every single scene or episode, but they kind of look at all of it and they're giving their 2 cents to make sure there is continuity across the entire season.
How would you then describe like a cut? Like, or let's just say in this case, a Cobra Kai cut. How would you describe that?
Well, the first thing about Cobra Kai that is part of its DNA that I both agree with but sometimes disagree with is that we always make a joke. Like, it's so funny that we were talking about that one scene with that breath. The most common note that we get is it's not moving fast enough, cut the air out. And I'm like, but sometimes you need the air, right? So that's actually one of our biggest fights. They're like, it's got to move faster, pace it up. I'm like, but this scene shouldn't be paced up, right? Because sometimes you need the slow scene to make the next scene feel faster, even though it's not faster. But part of the DNA of the cut of Cobra Kai is there's never a wasted breath or a moment, and you got to keep things moving. And probably the most common note other than that would be it needs more energy. So like I'll have like a kick-ass AC/DC cue, and I'm like rocking to it, cutting the scene. They're like, yeah, no, we envisioned this with more energy. I'm like, seriously? Like more energy than, but they're like, no, it needs to be a bigger AC/DC cue. I'm like, all right. One of the rules that I've come up with, just for myself as an editor with this show specifically, is my goal is to get the note, you've gone too far, pull it back. So when I'm cutting something, it is so balls to the wall, intense and loud and crazy or whatever it is, I'm taking it literally to 11. The goal is I want the note from them, you need to pull it back. Needless to say, I've never gotten that note. But that's part of the DNA of the way that I cut my episodes is I'm going for the goal of them saying, you know what, you've finally gone too far, you need to pull it back. Yeah. If I had to pick the one moment or scene that I'm actually the most proud of in the entire series, we haven't even talked about it yet, and it is the season finale of season 3. So it's episode 310. And it's this idea of how do we just find the most balls to the wall version of how to do this? So they're like, nah, this is too much, you might want to pull it back. So this is the very final scene where Johnny and Daniel finally come together in the backyard of Miyagi-Do. And they had that very carefully scripted and shot. And they also had a song already chosen in the script. And I said, this song does not work. This isn't the right song. I'm like, I don't know. Like we've always kind of envisioned it that way. I'm like, this song doesn't work. Trust me. So as I was cutting the scene, put their song in, I'm like, this definitely isn't the song and I don't know what is. But I was just thinking, what is like the most turning the dial to 11, biggest build ever in the history of 80s music? I'm like, it's Phil Collins in the Air Tonight drum solo, right? So I started to do a search for it. And all of a sudden, I don't even remember how this came together, but all of a sudden I found the remix of it by the Proto Men, which had this kind of metal undercurrent vibe that sounded like our composers had composed it. So I put that in there and I literally started to sweat. I'm like, oh, they're going to think this is too much. They're totally going to think this is too much. I was literally shaking, sweating. I called in my assistant. I'm like, you got to watch this. Like, this is crazy. And I showed it to him and he turned around. He's like, dude, it's awesome. Don't touch it. One of the traditions that we have with Cobra Kai, even to this day, even with COVID, we figured out how to make it work. But we screened the editor's cut of the season finale in the room together, which is terrifying. Because it's your very first cut. They haven't seen anything. This is their baby. And I remember sitting there at my desk, getting ready for that cue to come in. And I'm like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Oh my God, they better like it. They better like it. And like 5 seconds into it, they already knew what it was. They were like, yes! And I was like, oh, thank God. So essentially what you see in the final version, that's the editor's cut of that scene. But that was never conceived on set. It wasn't conceived on paper. It was just, again, this combination of my love for the story, but also the fact that I'm a child of the 80s, grew up with that song. So it's just this convergence of all these various things.
You've given me a really, really interesting perspective because I've always been under the assumption that the director or the showrunners, they're the ones that call pretty much every single edit. But I'm really enjoying the fact that like it seems to be even for the editors on TV have so much creative freedom and permission to do what they think is best as well.
Oh, absolutely. There's just isn't enough time for a director and a producer to really be a part of 90% of the edits.
Wow.
So there's stuff that I have on TV where I would guess that 90% of it is my editor's cut because they just didn't have enough time to give me notes or for me to workshop things.
Wow.
Cobra Kai is a little bit different in that we have a lot more time. So there's a lot of workshopping. There's a lot of different versions, but like never is there a moment where I'm handed the dailies and somebody sits on the couch behind me and says, all right, so use the wide shot. Stop there. Okay, now I want you to use like there's none of that. We're making all of those choices. And if you get the scene right, you might not get a note. If you get the scene wrong, you might have to start over and cut a completely different version. But especially in television, even so, at least with features during your first cut, but especially in television, you are very autonomous, which means that if you see yourself as an operator, as opposed to a creative editor, like when I first learned about the editing process, it was in the commercial world. And I would see producers that would sit at a desk and they would have a paper edit literally with time codes to the frame. And they would say, here you go. And I would watch the editors operate. I'm like, oh, that looks like a really cool job. Until I realized that's not what I want to do at all, right? I want to be able to make those choices and I want to be able to create those moments. And in the scripted world, the editor is just left to their own devices for weeks or even months before anybody gives them notes. So there's a lot of creative freedom until there isn't.
Do you have to follow the script pretty much to a T on your first edit, or do you sometimes take pretty crazy creative liberties, like just ending a scene earlier or doing something where you're cutting out dialogue? Does that ever happen?
Yes. So that's very subjective depending on the people that you're working with. So what I always do when I'm working with somebody new is I always ask them the question, what is your expectation of my editor's cut? Some will say, I want to see exactly what was shot, exactly what was written. And others say, I don't give a crap, just give me the best version. So there are some things where I've said, this is exactly all of the footage that you used, all of your coverage, every single word in the order that was on the page, every single slug line, every action line, this is what you shot and this is what you wrote. If that's the case, it almost never works, ever. So what I generally do is I take a lot of license in the editor's cut. I see it as my job. When there is a clearly an obvious problem, I want to fix it so they never see the problem. So what I always want to do is I want to present people solutions and not present them problems. And this is an area where a lot of editors get themselves in trouble, is they'll send an editor's cut that clearly has 100 different problems. And then the director, the producer, whoever sees it is like, well, what's wrong with this? It's not working. Like, this is what you shot. This is what you gave me. It's like, maybe you could have taken a little of initiative to try and fix it. But you also have to communicate because some people don't want that. Some directors and producers, they want to be the fixers and allow you to be the operators. There's nothing wrong with that relationship, but it is not a good fit for me. So I want to be the one that presents the solutions. So even on my very first episode of Cobra Kai, I had never worked on it before. The first week that I was on the show was one of the most complicated montages that I've ever done. So it was episode 202, and it was the balance board montage intercut with them in the concrete mixer.
Oh,
First thing I ever had to work on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really complex. And a lot of that was also built in the edit suite as far as like how it feels like the same action is happening on both sides. Wasn't shot that way at all. Had to totally be constructed in the edit suite. But it was written very, very differently. The pacing of it was different. The scene breaks were different. And one of the showrunners, John Hurwitz, one of the creators of the show, he came into my edit suite the first week, barely knew me. He's like, how's it going? I'm like, yeah, it's not working. Like, what do you mean? Like, yeah, it's a great sequence and it's going to be awesome, but the way that it's written doesn't work at all. You know, he got a little alarmed. I'm like, just trust me. Let me cut my version of it. Because if I show you the version that's written, you're going to see that it doesn't work. And I just want you to see my solution. So they never saw the version that was written. They saw my version. They're like, this is a really great start. Then we workshopped it and we fixed it. But I always want to get it as far as I think it needs to get, then let them take it over, as opposed to it is your responsibility to fix all the problems. I see that as my responsibility.
You're a problem fixer,
You're a
bro.
problem fixer. I was under the assumption that was like a script. But no, that
was
you
all
found that
constructed in the
solution.
timing in the edits because the way the scenes were broken, it was very, very different. If you were to read it on the page, you'd be like, that was all one scene. Like felt like 4 different scenes, but it was all continuous on the page. Yeah. So I had to find a way to take all the motions and make it feel like you were seeing the same story happening in 2 different locations simultaneously, which is not the way it was conceived. Wow. So you have to be ready to solve those kinds of problems.
The thing that stuck out to me, just as far as the way that you see scenes and you're like, okay, here's a problem here, here's a problem here. That's the same way that you see networking too. You're just a problem solver. That just really like stuck out to me, that you are always looking for problems and saying, okay, how can I bring value? How can I make it better so other people don't have to deal with that?
Exactly. And I'll go even one layer deeper, and we'll step into the existential realm again. I have a tendency to get very existential very quickly.
I'm down.
But one of the things that I've learned from working with my students for years and years and years and helping them either move up the career ladder and further their career path, or those that are stable in their careers but just want more work-life balance, or they're like the industry and the job are just consuming them and they want to develop these different strategies. They always have this idea that when they work with me and they learn these strategies, on the other side is going to be a life that's devoid of problems. They're going to solve their problems and then their problems are going to go away. And then they come back to me after 12, 16 weeks. They're like, things are just getting harder. I'm like, yup. Welcome to life. Your problems don't go away, they become more complex. So what I always tell people is that the secret to really enjoying what you do for a living is not eliminating problems. It's surrounding yourself with problems that you enjoy solving.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have 1.5 million problems in my life right now, but I'm excited about solving all of them. And when I'm choosing a project, if it's an editorial project, everything's going to have problems. But if it's a story that I don't want to tell or people that I don't want to work with, then I filled my life with 12 hours a day of problems that I could give 2 shits about solving. Wow. Which then makes me miserable and exhausted and resentful and burned out. Whereas with Cobra Kai, minus just the sheer amount of hours and problems that there are, I love solving them. It gets to a point where I'm like, yeah, I could use a break from solving all these problems. It'd be great to, be able to get away from this for a little while. But other than that, like I see the problems coming at me and I'm like, bring it on. So it's not a matter of how do I solve all these problems to get rid of them. It's how do I choose problems that I want to solve. And if that's networking, if that's editing, if that's life in general, just surround yourself with problems that you're excited to solve. One of the things that I talk about really getting deeper into the psychology of being an editor and the neuroscience of being an editor. And this is also something that's a little controversial, but I don't shy away from being controversial, is that I ultimately believe on a neural level, if we're talking about neurons and we're talking about all the neurochemistry and all the brain chemicals that we have, the reason that we as editors do what we do is because we are chasing our next high. And what I mean by that is that literally when you put things into a timeline and you have this shot and this shot and this shot and you put the music in and you're just like, man, that's the exact moment and the beat of the music to the cut. That's a dopamine hit in your brain. Dopamine hits are addictive. So ultimately, when we are on the timeline, all we are doing is chasing our next high. You're not going to get that high if you're working on projects and stories that don't interest you in a medium that doesn't interest you. So if you want to enjoy what you're doing and get to this place where neurologically time disappears, and anybody that's done this for any length of time, they can all have that story of, oh my God, it's 6 hours later and I haven't gone to the bathroom or eaten anything, right? That's getting into a state of deep focus and flow. And the only way that happens is doing something that you're really engaged with that's creating these constant dopamine hits. So on a neurological level, we're all just addicts.
Edit addicts.
Yep, we're just edit addicts. We're just chasing our next high. And in order to make that a pleasurable experience, you have to be working on stories that you want to tell.
You know your passion with the history of for the Karate Kid, and you know, all right, that's the next high that I want, or that is where I know what my passion is. But how would someone who's probably still developing their ability and developing their creativity, how could they better and sooner find what it is that they're most passionate about?
The biggest thing that you can do if you don't know is you need to choose something that you want to do next. People will often think I've got 2 choices. Either I'll do anything or I have to decide to do this one thing for the rest of my life. There's a middle ground. The middle ground is I want to try this next, right? So if it's a matter of, well, I don't think I want to do TikTok videos for the rest of my life, but there's something about the craft of TikTok that's really interesting to me. I like the way that it's fast paced, or I can do the graphics, or I like watching people do this, right? Maybe you're obsessed with that. I don't know. But you can say, this is what I want to get good at next. Because if you look at it as everything must move me forwards and be a big credit or whatnot, you're going to get trapped because you're not always going to get the best credits working with the best people because you're just learning. But instead, it's I want to acquire skills. So you want to become Liam Neeson at Taken, where you can say, I have a very specific set of skills, right? Enjoy the process of acquiring those skills. I've worked on trailers, I've worked on commercials, I've done behind the scenes documentaries, I've done all kinds of different stuff, but I always looked at it as I'm acquiring a skill. And again, if we're going to get even more meta about it, every single format or medium of editing is learning how to speak a different language, right? So I don't want to speak just one language, which is long form dramatic action. I want to be able to speak multiple languages. So I enjoy the process of learning and acquiring those skills. So when you're younger, think, maybe I don't want to do this the rest of my life, but this is a skill that will serve me for my entire career. So enjoy the process of acquiring those skills.
Definitely listening to yourself rather than letting the universe give you jobs and then suddenly 10, 20 years down the line, you become a commercial editor and you went, wait, no, actually, I didn't want to be a commercial editor. I wanted to be a music video editor. It's probably a bit too late now, or maybe you can still change it, but it's identifying, I want to do this next, and then see where that takes me.
Yeah, I mean, my entire business model is based on people coming to me that say, yeah, so 15 years ago, I just kind of took whatever job came along and now I hate what I do, help me. So I'm basically destroying my future business by telling everybody to pick a direction now. Because so many people hit that wall where they're like, yeah, so I took this one gig because I needed the paycheck and I was cutting a reality show and it's been about 15 years and I'm still cutting reality shows and I've hated every minute of it, but I don't know how to do anything else because I've been pigeonholed. And then I ask the question that really pisses people off. Have you been pigeonholed? Or did you allow yourself to be pigeonholed?
Ooh, that's dark.
Right? That's when I see the kind of mind-blowing moment like, oh shit, this is my fault. I'm like, yeah, it is. Do you know what word got you into this position? Like, what are you talking about? You were in this position because of a single word. Yes. You said yes to the wrong projects over and over and over and over. And if it's about acquiring a skill or building a network or just meeting with one person, whatever it is, then you have a reason to do it. But if it's just because it's the thing that came along and you feel obligated to say yes, you are letting the universe design your career path.
I think so many people just get tempted with a paycheck, with stability, with, oh, okay, like this is where I've ended up and this is all I know now and it's been 15 years. But that unhappiness and that unsatisfaction just really eats away at them. Mm-hmm. They're afraid because they don't want to take the wrong step. And what they don't realize and what you're saying is there is no wrong step. There's just the next step. Mm-hmm. And you will learn something. You'll have a relationship. Something will happen because of that step that you're going to take. Mm-hmm. And so don't be afraid to take it because there's always going to be good to come out of it. And you can always change the direction for that next step after that first step.
Exactly. So the secret to me being successful at anything that I've been successful at, whether it's editing, whether it's building a business, whether it's now American Ninja Warrior, the only reason I am where I am in comparison to others is I'm willing to fail more and fail faster than you are. That's it. I look at something and I'm like, how quickly can I fail at this? And I'm fine doing it publicly and doing it spectacularly. I have entire reels online of me failing, trying to swing from this bar to that bar, or climb a rope or whatever, right? Because I know the faster I fail, the faster I learn, the faster I iterate, and the faster I get better. And most people are so afraid of failing that that's what's stopping their growth, right? But if you see it as a total failure, or even worse, I am a failure, that's what stops people. As opposed to, this isn't failure, this is feedback. I've now gotten information, so I know what not to do, so I can now get closer to know what to do. Right? So you've made mistakes doing this podcast itself, doing the podcast in general, which means you now have feedback that's going to make the likelihood higher the next time you interview somebody, you're not going to make those mistakes. But then the best part is you're going to make all new ones that you didn't make today, right?
Yeah.
I've yet to have a perfect podcast interview, done it 300 times. There's still something that I screw up. I'm confident enough in my ability to do it well, but there's always something new. I'm still iterating to this day. How do I get better at transitioning from this to this? Like the thing that drives me crazy when I listen to myself, and I do it very seldom, but I'm trying to eliminate the word so from my vocabulary. Somebody talks, so what I'd like to talk about now, and I'm like, oh, get rid of that word from your vocabulary. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to learn. How do I eliminate that? Always these little tweaks, right? So dare I say always optimizing what the next version is going to look like. It's really important to focus on this idea of constant progression and not perfection, because perfection does not exist. Take it from a recovering perfectionist. Perfection does not exist, but if I can focus on just getting a little bit better, great. But in order to get a little bit better, you have to be willing to address and acknowledge these are things that didn't go so well. I'm going to acknowledge these failures and I'm going to get better at them. But the faster you're willing to fail, the faster you're going to succeed.
So it comes down to basically having a really good and healthy relationship with failure.
Failure is my best friend. Yeah. So if I haven't failed at something during the day, then I'm not doing it right.
Fail every day. I like that.
I want to fail multiple times every single day. If I'm not failing multiple times a day, then I'm not trying hard enough. There is nothing scarier for people than comfort. Comfort is a very, very scary place.
What do you think has been your biggest failure and what did you learn from it?
Biggest failure, I mean, it's hard for me to say it's a failure because I've learned so much from things that would be considered failures. But my first attempt at being an entrepreneur and a business owner was a pretty massive failure if I were to just hit the stop button and I don't take all the lessons learned from it. But I was in the process in my late 20s of building my own boutique editorial house. And I had gotten all these big equipment loans and I rented a space and I was hiring people. And essentially we were subcontracting for much larger trailer companies. So they would have overflow and they would send all the work to me and then I would disseminate it amongst my team. And essentially I got about 6 months into it and I thought, I don't want to do this. Why do I have this big giant space and why do I have 6 figures in equipment loans and I've got this, TerraBlock Facilis and I've run all these cables. And I realized that I did all of this because I wanted to have more freedom to be able to edit the projects that I wanted. And all I was doing was running a business all day long and all of my editors were doing all the work that I wanted to be doing. And 6 months later is when I got the opportunity to edit Burn Notice, which was my big career changing opportunity. And I ended up closing up that business. So in a vacuum, in microcosm, that business was a complete and total failure. But the amount of knowledge that I acquired from that failure that became feedback has informed all of the decisions that I made building the business that I am now. So I was, again, just able to take that failure, iterate and say, this worked, this didn't, this worked, this didn't. How do I apply it to my new endeavors?
So you said that like that business wasn't fulfilling you because you were actually not doing the work that you wanted to be doing. So what is it that makes you happy now and why are you doing that work?
What makes me happy now, and goes much deeper into like, why are we even here on the planet? It's not just what are the stories that I want to tell as an editor or who do I want to be as a dad, but why am I here? And it took me years to really dig into this and discover it. And again, shameless plug, I've got an entire podcast about this. I have an episode where I worked with one of the world's foremost experts on discovering and finding what is your why. So I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek. He wrote a book called Start With Why.
Yeah.
He has a book called Find Your Why, which is more the workshopping version of his book. And I did a session with the author of that. His name is David Mead. And I recorded the session and it's on my podcast where I literally discovered and found my why. And what I found is that through all of the various childhood experiences that I've had, all of the themes that are common between the stories that I love, the experiences that I have as an adult, it all comes down to that I see my purpose is that I am here to inspire others to step outside their comfort zones so they can discover their true potential. Whether that's through American Ninja Warrior, whether that's through Cobra Kai, whether that's through Optimize Yourself, it's all the same theme. It's all the same idea in different various formats and mediums. But I'm here to scare the crap out of people, to get out of your comfort zone and realize you are capable of so much more than you ever thought you were.
I've noticed that subconscious theme. Like with that philosophy, I can definitely feel that theme being explored in Cobra Kai, each of those characters using karate to find their why.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you have that knowledge and that understanding is helping you inform your creativity as well. Like this is how you can tell that story because you have the emotional intelligence and experience with it as well.
Mm-hmm. And also just going really, really deep into my childhood experiences, which again connects to Cobra Kai, which again connects to American Ninja Warrior and Optimize and everything else, is that I was heavily bullied as a child. I was very, very different. I was very small, was not strong. I was always the weak link or the runt of the group. So I had a very miserable elementary school and middle school. Like endless bullying. Like when people say, who was your bully growing up? I'm like, allow me to make a list. That many people. So part of what I do now psychologically is me covering up the inadequacy of my identity being formed as the weakest kid. Mm-hmm. I was always the one that everybody picked on that couldn't fight back. So now I've created this armor of this perceived strength to cover all of that perceived weakness, which brings back to this theme of I want to help other people discover their true strength so they don't have to go through the same things that I went through, which is why the Karate Kid was so formative. Yeah. And why when I'm cutting a scene for Cobra Kai, it's not just, I want to make this good. I know exactly how this character feels. Yeah. And emotionally, I know the music to choose or the coverage to choose to evoke that feeling. So it's not just, here's a good scene that I've cut as a good editor. It's the level of empathy that I have for the characters because I've been there that allows me to tell a better story, which I couldn't do on other shows with characters that I can't resonate with. So that's why it's so important when you choose stories or choose the people that you work with, that why you do what you do is in alignment with the why of that story. Otherwise, you can't cut a great scene.
It reminds me of, because I think I studied acting a lot as well, and I think one of the methods I do use is emotion memory. Here is a memory that I had, and here's how I felt. And now that I know how that feels, here is a scene I'm editing that has a similar emotion towards it. But since I know how that feels, this is how I can express it. And so, yeah, you're using your own internal experiences and then able to express that through the editing.
Yeah. Acting was actually something I was interested in a long time. And at one point was seriously considering that was going to be my path. And I think that all of the studying, I took some acting classes in college and read the books on all the different, styles and methods and whatnot. And very early in my professional editing career out in LA, I developed something that I called method editing. Before I started a project, I would consume everything possible that was just like that project to internalize the emotional feelings, the pacing. It would be just like if I were a composer. If all I did was listen to Beethoven for 20 hours a day on a loop for a month, without even thinking about it, I would start making choices similar to that because it's ingrained in my memory in my brain. That's what I would do with editing. And that's why it's one of the reasons I'm really genre agnostic, and people look at my resume and they're like, I don't get it. Like, you just kind of do a little bit of everything, which again is by choice because I don't want to be pigeonholed and I always want to take on a new challenge. So an example would be the first feature film that I did was called Fat Girls, P-H-A-T, fat, with a Z at the end, starring Monique. Sounds very different than Cobra Kai, right? Not a world that I'd really inhabited, but before I started cutting that project, I just consumed urban comedies on a loop all day, every day, to the point where I already felt the music choices and I knew the pace and I knew the style of comedy. So once I started to make the cuts and put in the music, it was almost subconsciously being edited without me having to think, ooh, how would I do it for this genre? I just felt it. But that required complete and total immersion in that genre. So I'll give you another example that will, number one, demonstrate how old I really am in this industry, but number two, how I would approach something challenging. So I've become very acquainted with Mr. Beast because I have a 12-year-old son that is completely and totally obsessed with Mr. Beast. So let's just say I've watched more Mr. Beast than anybody my age should ever watch Mr. Beast. And the first few times I watched it, I swear to God, and this has nothing to do with the genre, there's nothing wrong with it, but I kept asking myself, how long before I have an epileptic seizure? Because it is so fast.
I am so sorry for that.
And my brain is just not used. And again, it's just showing my age. It's showing how, I have consumed a very different kind of media my whole life. And because of that, I've shown my son movies that were like really big movies in my time. He's like, Dad, this is really slow. I'm like, oh, this is Mr. Beast fault, right? The point being, this is the language that I don't naturally speak. My brain is not wired to be able to cut something like Mr. Beast. But using this method editing idea that I've talked about, you give me a week, I can cut Mr. Beast as good as any other editor out there. And what would I do? I would literally sit for 18 hours a day, Clockwork Orange style, and I would watch Mr. Beast over and over and over. Right? Like, I know, I still hear the sound of my sleep, like the Metal Gear Solid sound effect. Yeah. I hear it in my brain because I've watched so much of it. And I already have an instinct about where I would use that or where I would throw in the big red graphics, right? Or the way that it cuts from one scene to the next when they're, running, trying to catch somebody or whatever it is. So it's not a language that I naturally speak. But through the process of method editing, I would learn to speak it.
With the YouTube videos that we edit, we have the luxury of analytics. We post a video, it gathers all the data, and we get to see what worked, what didn't, where did audiences click off, where did audience replay. Knowing that Netflix is also an online platform that would also be able to gather that data, do you have the privilege of seeing that?
We do not, and I'm very glad that we don't. Which actually brings up another story that I don't get to tell that often. But going back to very early in my career, I started in trailers. And within about 6 months out of graduating from college, went from assistant editor to editor. Again, talking about this idea of showing up, being consistent. There's a lot of other stuff that I could talk about in another day. The point being that I got into working on trailers and I started to rise in the trailer world. And it went from working on indie trailers and going with your gut and all of these other things to all of a sudden realizing that most of the really big A-list blockbuster trailers are cut together based on data. So things have changed now, but 20 plus years ago, it was literally people with clipboards in the mall pulling people away saying, hey, would you like to watch some advertisements? Do you want to watch some trailers? And they would look at version A, B, and C and say, which one do you like best? And then some soccer mom would say, well, I thought that version A was a little bit slower. I really liked the music in the B version. That was really good. I didn't like the C version at all. They gather all of that data into an Excel spreadsheet and they have these quadrants. And they would hand it to the trailer editors and they would say, here are our notes. And that's when I said, I am not making my decisions and editing my trailers with Microsoft Excel. That is not what I do. So I don't want, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with analytics, but don't use the analytics to guide your creative decisions.
Yeah.
If you use your gut to guide your creative decisions, but you have some instinct or feeling like, I don't know, something just doesn't feel right. I feel like all of these things are just, they're too slow to get going, or like the first 2 minutes, something's wrong. Boom, analytics says you're losing everybody within the first 60 seconds. Now there's something to change, right? The data lines up with your intuition. But if your intuition is completely against the data, I would choose intuition before the data. And I say this to, of course, the guys that work on Mr. Beast, which is the biggest channel on the planet, which is very much analytics driven. So don't listen to a word that I say, but I'm still a big believer in following your intuition first.
That's the arguments that I do bring in as well, of like trying to understand how you feel about the content rather than how you expect everyone else to feel about the content. It is a balance. I think it's easy to treat data as fact and then simply then not listen to yourself. Whereas I think you internally is the best truth that you can get. And so I do find it often confusing that people do choose to ignore that and then choose data to be their information instead.
Yeah, so it can be useful, but only to a point, and you have to be willing to trust your intuition and not defer all of your decisions to analytics and to data.
So you're saying you're down to edit a Mr. Beast video?
Oh, I don't. We'll put a pin in that one. Could I do it? Yes. Would I have the amount of time to put in to be ready and prepared to do it well? It would take a lot of time for me to be able to sit down and cut a Mr. Beast video that was actually good and fit the genre.
In the same sense, like I feel very comfortable giving Mr. Beast edit, off I go. If you give me a Cobra Kai edit, that's a whole new language I'm going to have to learn. If you give me Top Gun Maverick, that's a whole nother language that I will have to spend a long time learning how to cut an action sequence. And so it's understanding the language that you know. And then if you're tasked on something, being willing to learn that new language and being open-minded of like, okay, how can I talk this language?
Yeah, and I think what's also important about this is that as editors, just as people that do creative work, not just editors, there's a very fine line and a very slippery slope between editing is what I do versus editing is who I am.
Wow.
And as soon as your job becomes your identity, if it doesn't go well, it's very difficult to separate the job from yourself. And it's very difficult to say I failed versus I'm a failure. So an example would be that if we're looking at Mr. Beast, for example, if you handed it to me now, and I cut it together, you'd both be like, I mean, this guy cut Cobra Kai and like, this is not the best edit. It's because I don't speak the language. It's not because I am a bad editor. But I think a lot of people, when they try different things or something is thrust upon them and they don't feel prepared, they take it upon themselves. And if it doesn't go well, they're like, well, I'm just not a good editor. I'm not good at this. It's like, no, you just don't speak the language yet. Just because you speak English fluently doesn't mean you can speak Mandarin tomorrow. So if somebody forced you to speak Mandarin and you failed, you wouldn't think, I'm horrible at speaking. Editing is the same thing. It's all different languages. So don't take it upon yourself to think that if I failed at this or I can't get it, it's because I'm bad at the craft. I haven't learned that specific language yet.
And just be willing to learn that language.
Yes, the willingness to put in the time to learn how to speak it fluently takes a lot of time, which is why it would terrify me to cut a Mr. Beast video. I'm like, I've got to block out a week just to get prepared to really learn that language.
You have the great foundational knowledge of editing. Like that's a universal language. To then learn more of sort of specific languages, you're actually reverse engineering. Okay, here's a 5 seconds thing. Let me dissect every single frame of that 5-10 seconds and then reverse engineer. And then that gives you an idea. Okay, I think I have a decent understanding of how that language is now.
Yes, which just tells you that to do this job really well, you have to have a bit of an obsessive personality. If you haven't sensed that, I have a bit of an obsessive personality.
Yeah.
I think all
which
of
is
us
my
do.
superpower and my kryptonite.
Well, thank you so much, Zach.
Yeah, of
You're
course.
amazing.
Pleasure to be here. This is a lot of fun.